go in bits. Yes, Jimmy, welcome.
Thank you, Amrex. I'm honored to be on. Thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry I couldn't have come on earlier. As you know, I was mourning my father. But now that we are here, let me be very clear. We are a country that is governed by laws, and everything we do is within that framework. Our government, and it's important people understand this because for many people it's not basic enough. A government simply operates to mobilize resources from the citizens of Kenya so that they can be used for the needs of all the citizens of Kenya. And to mobilize those resources, it has two avenues. One is taxation, which is the primary one, and the other is debt, which is simply supposed to be a top up. That is all, a top up. In fact, if you read the Constitution carefully, it is very clear that they expect us to have what you call a balanced budget, that we live within our means, the resources we're able to mobilize. Now, our 2010 Constitution and subsequent PFM, Public Finance Management Act, anchored what you call financial controls on our resources. Those financial controls embedded in the Constitution, embedded in PFM, are law. In other words, you are not supposed to breach those provisions. But what happened from 2013 when the law became active? This is where we say, because we have bothered to do, I believe, the first forensic audit on our public debt. This is when the rain started beating us. This is when the biggest fraud on the people of Kenya occurred. And if you don't mind, I would like to explain this in detail. One thing my late father taught me a long time ago is that to be a leader or to be able to talk to people, you must be able to teach. People must learn. When they learn, they grow in their knowledge and their scrutiny. So we bothered to commission an audit on our public debt. And this audit is called a forensic audit. A forensic audit is an audit that looks at fraud. Is there been any avenue that the law has not been followed in the procurement of our public debt? So when the president the other day said he's got a forensic audit team, or task force as he called it, the first thing I looked at is on all those appointees, there's no forensic auditor at all. A forensic auditor is a very different breed from just a simple auditor. These are licensed people. And we bothered to get what was the foremost forensic auditor in Kenya, a man called Bernard Muchere, who had done a lot of internal audit for government for the last 41 years. He headed the team, and within, let's say, about 4 to 5 months, he had completed the entire job. These records are public, so there was nothing that was hidden. So, what happens is that our laws anchor this debt. It says, for example, that debt must be on the budget. Number one, it says that debt in the medium to long term should only be taken for development. Number two, it says that you cannot borrow for recurrent expenditure. In other words, to pay salaries, or if people want to get on a jet plane to fly off to America, you can't pay for that. You can't pay for any other expenditure other than development. And then it says, number three, that if you want to borrow because you have cash flow problems, you can, but it must be within 1 year, and it must be paid within that 1 year. And on top of that, it gives a maximum, a ceiling. And the ceiling says this: it cannot be 5% more, it can only be a maximum of 5% of the total tax revenue, audited tax revenue returns of the previous financial year. So if you collected 2 trillion in tax revenue, then 5% means that you cannot take more than 100 billion. It also goes further to say that that is expected to be an overdraft at CBK. Now, that is the basis of our laws. One other provision I might like to say is what is called Article 214. Article 214 says there is the consolidated fund where all our revenue must be put in. So whether it's tax revenue, whether it is debt revenue, it must be put in one simple fund called the consolidated fund, one account, nothing else. So where did the rain start beating us? In 2013, the Uhuru Ruto government went to the parliament and they proposed an amendment number 1 to the Consolidated Fund, an amendment through the Public Finance Management Act, that you amend the Constitution, Article 214, through the Public Finance Management Act, which, as you and I know, is an illegality. You cannot amend the Constitution through an act. And they added 2 more provisions that were not in the Constitution, saying that money, in essence, do not have to enter the consolidated fund. That was the first. The second is that they introduced something called supplementary budget number 2. Supplementary budget number 2 was another foundation of fraud. If you read the provisions in the Constitution on a supplementary budget, first it is an addition to the budget that has been passed by the end of June that year. So it is just supplementing the items there, and there is a maximum that the addition cannot be more than 10%. Now, that means that there's a ministry, for example, that is building a road, and they find that it was 100 shillings, and the cost has gone up to 110, so they ask for the 10 more. But it is already in the budget, 100 shillings. Now, here, in supplementary 2, they suddenly decided they're introducing something called a new budget with the new projects that were not in the previous budget passed in the appropriations of that June. So this is where the fraud began. Now, the fraud began with those 2. So money started being borrowed that were not on the budget. Money started going into accounts that were not the consolidated fund. And our summary is simply this. And I'll give you a summary from July 2013 all the way to June 2023. 10 years. Remember, I said debt is a top up, it is not a principle. So we said, let us look at the accounts of government. What is the government expenditure? How much did the government put on the budget for development? It was 6 trillion shillings. How much did they put for the counties? We put the figure. How much are their salaries over those 10 years? We put the figure. How much were their operations expenses? We put the figure. How much were their pensions? We put the figure. One item we removed, because this is what is called a primary balance, we removed one item called any debt payments. So we found a figure of 14.6 trillion. We said, very good. That's the sum total of 10 years. Fantastic. So how much income did we get? How much was KRA stating that they got? All right? So KRA, we did their actuals, not estimates. It's simple math. We calculated simple math, and that figure over that period was 13.3 trillion. So we had what you call a shortage of only 1.3 trillion. 1.3 trillion was the only item that was needed for a budget, for all those budgets of 10 years. That is the top up that was required. That is what many economists like to call the deficit. Nice, simple, clean, 1.3 trillion. So we said, okay, how much did we borrow? We borrowed, Eric, to your shock, a figure of 7.7 trillion over the same period. In other words, if you do the subtraction of 1.3, 6.4 trillion more than we needed, more than was on any budget that had been put forward, more than any approval from Parliament, because Parliament approves a budget where the debt is anchored. That means that that 6.4 did not go to anything for the sovereign called the Kenyan. It is simply a heist. But we didn't stop there. We went on and we said, in the same period, how much money was allocated to debt payments? How much of our taxes, the ones that Kenyans sweat to pay, went towards our debt payments? Our figures had ended because we had done July up to July 2022. We found we had paid 5.6 trillion. To June 2023, we added another 1.4. So there you have 7 trillion. Then this last financial year that has just passed with the controversial bill that you're seeing people rejected, this last financial year, we paid another 1.8. So that is 9.8 trillion we have paid for debt payments, right? We overborrowed by 6.4. Okay. What are we being asked for today? The figure is 11 trillion. This figure does not come down. When we did our audit in 2022, it was 8.5. Today, it's going to 11 trillion. You now balance it between how much, what the dollar exchange rate is. This is a phenomena that we cannot deal with. This is a grievous fraud, and we are never meant to pay it. It is our chain, it is our slavery. And let me put that slavery in context as to the debt that has been taken. Two things I want to say. Our biggest problem is that you must understand that debt is tax in advance. Our taxes have to pay it. So you go back to our history, even before we had these great laws in the Constitution and PFM, Public Finance Management. When Moi handed over the economy of Kenya to Mwai Kibaki, Moi was collecting 170 billion in tax revenue. And he was paying, of every 100 shillings of that tax revenue, 28 shillings towards debt payment. He had in 1995 appealed to donors, in other words, the creditors, at a group called the Paris Club, and had gotten softer repayment terms. He was paying 28. He had rescheduled his debt. He was paying 28 shillings of every 100 to debt. So Kibaki takes the economy and he hands it over to Uhuru in 2013. And at that point, Kibaki has taken revenue to 1 trillion shillings, just under. Just under. And you know how much he was paying to debt of every 100? 18 shillings of every 100 shillings was going to debt payment. So he had brought it down. Great. We had seen the modernization of Kenya because Kibaki is the father of Kenya's modern age. In 2022, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, but I must say Uhuru and Ruto were in the same government, hands over to Ruto. And at that point, revenue had gone to something like 2.1 trillion, double. But 70 shillings of every 100 was going to debt. Today, as we are talking, 80 shillings, just under 80 shillings of every 100 of tax revenue we sweat and contribute goes towards the payment of one item called debt. So you can understand why he wants to come and tax us more and do everything he can, because we are at that state where you have just a manager who is simply just receiving money and paying debt. He's not managing any other affair. That is the
Wait,
critical
wait,
nature we are in.
wait, Jimmy. What did you say? I had something 80, 100, something. Can you repeat it so that it gets deeper
Let me
into our
repeat it.
bone marrow?
Yes. Let me repeat it. Eric, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Let me repeat.
We lost you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear
Yes.
me now?
Just repeat
Okay.
that bit of 80, 80, 100, something.
Yeah. I will come back.
How are our taxes being used? One person in his own personal account having 7.4 billion. 7.4 billion. You go up to Bungoma, where I come from, where poverty is the order of the day. 100 million is siphoned from Bungoma. What are you saying? What are you saying? What is he saying?
Yes, go on. What are you saying? Hello, Jimmy. We lost you. Mercy, I can see you here. How are you, Mercy?
Can you hear me?
Just hold on, Jimmy. Mercy?
Can you hear me, Amerix?
Just
Amerix,
hold
can
on
you
a
hear
bit,
me?
Jimmy. We lost you. Mercy, can you hear
Okay.
me? Mercy?
We can hear you.
Yes, go on, go on, go on. Can you tell us what happened? Why? Because we say debt, the debt problem is because of the political class. And the political class begin this problem by hoodwinking the people down there, the rural people, the voters. They con and steal from them. Then they graduate from the rural voters to the treasury. Can you please tell us, Mercy, what happened down there in Uasin Gishu? Mercy. Mercy, is there a problem from your side? Mercy?
Eric, shall I continue? Can you hear me?
Okay, go on, go on, go on. A lot of confusion everywhere. Go
Sorry,
on.
Eric. Sorry, Eric. I was saying, you asked me to repeat that for what is this about every 100? So what has happened is that when Moi handed over the economy of Kenya to Kibaki, he handed over a revenue base of taxation of 170 billion. That's the amount of tax Moi was collecting. And of every 100 shillings of that debt, he was paying 28 of every 100 towards the payment of debt. When Kibaki handed over his economy to Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, he was collecting 1 trillion. He had taken revenue tax collection to 1 trillion from 170 by widening the economic base of Kenya, removing barriers to our growth. And of every 100 shillings of tax revenue, he was paying 18 shillings towards the payment of debt. Remember, debt is tax in advance. When Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta handed over to William Ruto, but I like to repeat that they were in the same government together, revenue, tax revenue had gone to 2.1 trillion. But for every 100 shillings of that tax revenue, 70 shillings was going to one item called debt payments. Today, the end of the financial year 2023-2024, which ended June 30th, the calculations are the following: that for every 100 shillings, tax return revenue has gone to 2.4, but for every 100 shillings of that 2.4, 80 shillings, just under 80 shillings, is going towards the payment of debt. We are in an ICU situation. And unfortunately, as I said earlier, this debt did not come to us. It was never for our benefit. It is contrary to our laws, and we cannot and should not pay it. We should call it what it is, a fraud on the Kenyan people. And that fraud is leading to our strangulation and our enslavement, because this fraud continues for the next 10 years, unabatedly increasing. These debt payments do not decrease. We paid 1.8 this last financial year. We are paying a similar amount, probably even more, because I'm sure the dollar will not remain where it is. Then this coming financial year, it's going to be more in 2026. It will be horrific. This is why we are in the problems we are facing. And I want to explain this debt in terms of its composition. When Moi was rescheduling his debt, he was only dealing with one party called the Paris Club. That is where you have the bilateral donors. You have IMF, you have World Bank, you have what you call the bilateral agreements with, the Western world. Today, we have a Madrid. We have 4 pockets. We have the bilateral Paris Club. We have the Chinese debt. We have something else called the London Club. The London Club debts are the Eurobonds you've been hearing about, are the so-called syndicated loans from these Western banks that are really commercial loans. And then you have the 4th, which is called domestic debt. These bonds and bills people keep subscribing to every so often. A fraud beyond your imagination. These are the 4 pockets. And I can tell you today.
Okay, Jimmy.
Yes.
Okay, Jimmy. Hold on a bit.
Yes.
This country.
Yes, Amerix, I'm glad to be back. I was saying that we have what you call 4 pockets of debt. And the 4 pockets are described this way. The Paris Club pocket. This Paris Club pocket is the pocket that has the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF, World Bank, and a lot of the Western bilateral agreements. We have another, which is called the London Club debt. The London Club debt is where you have Eurobond, and you have syndicated loans. Very expensive debt. Then you have the Chinese debt. Some of it, most of it, very kosher, but there's been some malfeasance, which I'll explain shortly. It's very soft, but I'll tell you of something that was glaringly a big fraud on Kenyans. And the last pocket is what you call domestic debt. Now, remember what I said earlier, that in what is called the medium to long term, our law is very clear. You can only borrow for development. Only borrow for development. So you'll find in the bilateral, what you call the Paris Club debt, the bilateral ones, you'll find them on the budget. You'll find line items. For example, USAID is funding a bridge in Lamu, for example, or British aid is funding something in education, or there is a road being built by the Italians, and it's on the budget. It is always in what you call the appropriations bill. The appropriations bill is basically the budget according to our laws. Now, you'll find that. You'll find there is support for IMF and World Bank in the budget. It is there. Some budget is support going to line items, what are called vote items in the budget. Some of this IMF money I'll come to later, we are questioning what it's about because it is not in the budget. Now, you come to what you call this new pocket that was introduced over the last 10 years or so, called the London Club pocket. Kibaki took a small portion of it as he was exiting, but it was really perpetuated under this regime of Uhuru Ruto. That pocket of London Club is very expensive commercial money, more or less commercial money. It comes from private investors. Eurobond comes from private investors looking for where they can put their money, right, and earn a good interest rate. So the interest rate was taken for our first Eurobond of Trubin was about 6 or 7%, but it has gone up. Now, Eurobonds that the Uhuru Ruto government took was 7 billion. They've also taken a similar amount under syndicated loans, 7 billion. And I can tell you today that none of that money, because it is long term, it is beyond 1 year, none of that money, you're talking about $15 billion, appears anywhere in our budget. It funds not one project. It does not even, we don't even have it as appearing in the consolidated fund. It does not fund one item on the budget. That is your London Club pocket, and it is very expensive. Then you have the Chinese debt. The Chinese debt, most of it is anchored in our budget. It is very clearly stipulated what projects they're supporting. Right? If we are doing a road, if we are doing SGR, it has been there. But SGR has been a fraud of monumental proportions. And I'll simply put it this way, just to give you an example. Just to give you an example. I'm very familiar with this project called SGR. Very familiar. I initiated that project under the Kibaki regime. In fact, it was under the coalition agreement of Kibaki and Raila. We started that project in 2008, and that project was simply a private project. It had no government money. We wanted to do a private feasibility study because a company called RVR had failed. And we wanted to do private investment of a line from Mombasa all the way to Malaba. Right? Simply a private investment, no taxpayers' money. Our costing out of our feasibility study and our technical study came to 55 billion shillings, all the way from Mombasa to Malaba. I suddenly saw an amount of just Mombasa to Nairobi, somebody parachuting a project that had become government under the Uhuru Ruto government of 380 billion, just Mombasa to Nairobi. That project from Mombasa to Naivasha costed for what were called the original construction plus rolling stock amounted to 500 billion shillings. So just to give you a summary. So the cost of the project is 500 billion. Chinese Exim Bank, that's the Chinese debt, say we are going to loan the Kenya government a total of 90% of that money. So Kenyans, you must raise 10%. 10% of 500 is 50 billion shillings. So us from our hard-earned taxes must pay 10% before they pay the 90%. So we did an audit of these amounts. It's part of our debt audit. We did an audit. What happened? Did the Chinese give us all the money that they said? Yes, they did. They gave all the money. It was paid directly to China Road and Bridge Company, the 90%. So did Kenyans raise the 50 billion, which was 10% of 500, right? And did they contribute their share of 10%? We did the sums. Now, on the loan part, I want you to remember we are servicing that loan at very expensive rates. In fact, this coming month, there's a big bill coming up. Now, did we raise the 50 billion to as our contribution of 10%? So we did the numbers, right? And it's called Self-Raising Finance, SGR grant from the Treasury. So 50 billion was supposed to move from Treasury to Kenya Railways and then to the contractor called China Road and Bridge. So we just did the math. Eric, it was not 50 billion that was paid. It was 644 billion shillings that came out of the Treasury to go to Kenya Railways, to then go to China Road and Bridge as self-raising finance for a project worth 500 billion. So we paid for it with our own money and even more. And yet we took a loan and we are paying back that loan. China Road and Bridge for the building of SGR from Mombasa to Naivasha was paid a total of almost 1.2 trillion for a project of 500 billion, according to the contract documents. So 700 billion above what was required. That is a frightening fact. Then you come to something called domestic debt. What you hear, bonds and bills taken from our local banks, insurance companies, pension funds. This amount of the total debt we're talking about, almost 11 trillion, today stands at 5.1 trillion. 800 from our pension funds, 700 from insurance companies, the rest from banks. In other words, it's our deposits, the Kenyans' deposit in our banks, that the banks have decided to take to the treasury, loan to the treasury, and then our taxes pay them their huge interest rates. So you can see where you see some bank CEOs earning humongous amounts of bonuses and all sorts of amounts like 300-400 million shillings a year. This is why our money going to our government and our taxes paying for all these banks to make humongous profits at our expense. You and I try and borrow, we are told to borrow at 25%. They are loaning to the government at 16%. It is a monumental fraud because, again, there is nowhere in our appropriations bills revenue that you can say this money. Look at bonds. The other day they took an infrastructure bond of 200 and something billion shillings. I think it was February. What infrastructure on the budget was being funded? Nothing. Nothing. These bonds and bills have funded nothing in our budget. And yet, do you know how much interest we have paid for 5.1 trillion over 10 years? We have paid them a total of 2.7 trillion in interest payments. This is criminality beyond your imagination. And there are some key banks here that have perpetuated this fraud. KCB, Cooperative Bank, Equity Bank. Those are three banks that have perpetuated a very clear fraud on the Kenyan public, us as depositors, and us as taxpayers, and made humongous profits, become oligarchs against the sovereign, against us. And we must start saying we are not going to take this rubbish anymore. And this rubbish goes this way. If you have deposits in those banks, if your parents have deposits in those banks, we should pull them out tomorrow, not today, not yesterday, not the day after, tomorrow, if not today. Remove that money. Take it to banks that are not defrauding us, because what is happening there is a fraud of the highest proportions. I want to go back to the London Club debts. These bonds, Eurobonds, these syndicated bonds, these syndicated loans, none of those appear on the budget. But one underlying fact you will find is that somewhere along the way, like you saw recently with the latest payments of Eurobond, the last payment of Eurobond was paid 500 so-called billion balance, right, of the 2 billion we had borrowed. That was paid by World Bank, IMF. Why are they underwriting money that never came to us? Who is this that they are backing? So here they are. They encourage us to take those very expensive loans, knowing full well they are not on a budget. And then when we can't pay, IMF comes up and it starts rattling. Oh, we can save you, but these are the conditions. And the conditions become a matter they become a matter of our slavery. Now, all this information I'm giving is in the public domain. Our forensic audit is in the public domain. We got it from public documents. We are not trying to create new documentation. And we've been speaking this for the last 2 years. Kenyans need to understand categorically that we are in a mode of slavery. And I'll perpetuate this slavery by going back to the point where we were saying today, 80% of our tax revenue is going to one item called debt. These debts I'm talking about, and then which we have already paid for. We don't owe, but we are going to keep being made to pay unless we cut off this chain because it is illegal. We do not owe it. This coming financial year, 2024-2025, the estimate from the Treasury of debt payments, keeping the current exchange rate, is 1.853164. In other words, 1.853 trillion shillings is going towards the debt payments this financial year of 2024-2025. You come to the year 2025-2026, it is 2.2 trillion to be paid to debt payments. You go to the next year, 2026-2027, is 2.352. And remember, we are getting what you call diminishing returns on our revenue, the Laffer curve, which is the maximum you can squeeze out of us. There is no item in our budget that is taking so much money. People are complaining about confidential funds of 700 million shillings. Look at this year. You tell me which item is taking over 1.8 trillion, one single item in debt payments, in any payment. Nothing is doing that. Nothing at all. This is the tragedy that we are living in. We are in slavery. And we are in such slavery that William Ruto is soon going to come and tell us that he can no longer pay it. And that we have been unable to pay it because, you people rejected the finance bill. Now I cannot raise revenue. So now I have to default on this payment. And the default means that they now start coming to your accounts. They start looking for your deposits. And they start telling you that you've got to take a share of this. Otherwise, the banks will close. And we're going to have serious problems here. Ghana went through this. And Ghana are suffering today. They are suffering from 2022 December, where 70%, 70 shillings of every 100 went to debt. They are suffering. And I can tell you, it is so tragic because you go back to the London Club debts. You go back to these so-called Mzungus guy that he's talking about, these criminals that have perpetuated this fraud even in places like Malaysia and gotten caught. These big firms called JP Morgan Chase, they have been part of a conspiracy because if you are going to loan anybody money, the first thing you must do is your due diligence. What are you giving this money for? Is it in line with the laws of Kenya? Which project is being funded? The Eurobond that was taken in 2013. Our investigation is very clear on this. It started an investigation all the way back in 2014. When I can tell you here on this show, a man called Jacob Juma, the late, he was my friend, came to visit me. And he tells me, Jimmy, I can tell you there's something fishy going on here. And you know all he had? He was just simply reading what are called the National Treasury quarterly reports. That is all. And he said, the president stood up when he said he's taking the Eurobond. And he said, because he's taking the Eurobond, they are not going to borrow domestically. The estimate at the time was about 300 billion shillings. So 3 billion almost euro, Eurobond that he was taking. But when I look at the quarterly reports from the National Treasury, it seems they still borrow domestically from the local banks. And that's their quarterly report, not the budget, quarterly report. And they are not recording what happened to the Eurobond. So we started asking some questions. Unfortunately, we got the opposition leader, Raila Amolo Odinga at the time, to write a letter to the Treasury to ask where are these Eurobonds? The 2 billion you say you borrowed, what has happened to it? On a bit of a scare for the then Minister of Finance called Rotich, he released documentation. And he showed the following, that $1 billion, they went out into the market and they managed to get $2 billion early 2014. In fact, by May 2014. And that $2 billion, they showed us what is called the expenditure pattern of those dollars. So they said one of the first 1 billion, $650 million of that money went to pay a syndicated loan of Mwai Kibaki directly to a bank called Barclays Bank. In fact, Standard Chartered, sorry. And they showed us a SWIFT transfer of that amount. Then a SWIFT transfer is to show, like you get an RTGS that shows from point A to point B, it went to the account and was credited. Then they showed us that 350 balance of that first $1 billion, it went directly to the consolidated fund, exchequer account 00010,03987. And they showed us very clearly that account. 350 credited. We said, hallelujah, asante sana. Very good work. Then we said, where's the second one? They said, oh, the second one, we hung on to until September of that year. We don't know why they asked JP Morgan Chase to hang on to that. But they said it also came. We said, show us, like you showed us of the 350, show us this amount of 1 billion, how it came to the treasury. Said, because the 350 that came to the treasury, came to the central bank, account number 1, it showed categorically that you had a SWIFT transfer. You even had your letters from CBK addressed to the treasury, showing the exchange rate confirmation that you transferred to Kenya shillings. Show us the same for this $1 billion in September. They sent and put up a SWIFT transfer. But that SWIFT transfer did not show us where that money went. It was completely blackened out. Apart from the top, where you see it leaving an account at JP Morgan Chase, the rest was completely blackened out. Then they tried to quickly show us an amount in December that was directly from Citibank, what they called tap sales of $815 billion, right? That $815 billion, they showed us the SWIFT transfer. It came to an account they had now created in the central bank called a sovereign wealth account, some 10,12674 account, not the consolidated fund. We said, And then they showed us the communication from the same central bank saying we have credited this amount with an exchange rate of this value. We said, very good. Can you go back to the one of September? Where is it? They never, ever showed us. We eventually saw it in the Auditor General's special audit of the Eurobond done by Edward Awuko. And Edward Awuko, in his report, says that this amount entered an account called 8,214 something. We said, what account is this? We don't know it. We don't know it at all. What is this account? We never got a further explanation. But nobody dared to present even one iota of that SWIFT transfer like they had done for the others. Even the letter exchanging the amount from dollars to Kenya shillings, central bank saying this is the exchange value amount, they didn't show us. What we know is that that money, nobody has provided evidence that it entered this country. Now, the Auditor General in his report further goes to say that all these amounts cannot be attached to not even one project. And actually, even in his conclusion, says that when he asked the Treasury, what were these monies so-called used for? The Treasury says that these funds are fungible. In other words, they're interchangeable. They can do what they want with them. In other words, they admitted they are breaking the law. That is just one Eurobond of $2 billion. One did not come here. They subsequently took another 5. Please take note. They subsequently took another 7 in syndicated loans. We cannot find anywhere in our budget and in our books. Now, Kenyans, are we going to continually accept that we are going to become slaves and have agreed to become slaves, because this is what is called modern day slavery. Now, and for generations to come, the perpetuating our poverty and our slavery. In the old days, slavery was something that was done with chains put to our hands and our feet. That is what is happening here with this debt. Debt has now been used by our own oligarchs, our own people in power, and of course, in collaboration with others outside this land. Others outside this land who know what is going on, who know the illegalities of what has been perpetuated, to ensure that we are slaves to them in perpetuity. You can complain about the finance bill today or tomorrow, which are tax-raising measures, but we are going down so fast as a nation. The poverty rates are increasing by the day because of one item. Anything that is collected from us is going to others, and it never came to our use. And it's going in such large amounts. It is strangling us. It is finishing us for generations to come. And my proposal has been very clear. What is not in our laws, what does not exist in our constitution, is not liable to the sovereign. We are not and should not pay it. We must cut this chain off our neck. We must remove it. And those who put us in this mess must pay the ultimate price of justice for the people of Kenya, because they have caused havoc to our lives. We have said continually that this regime will not change it, because it was part and parcel of doing what we are suffering. They are not going to hang themselves. So William Ruto should not pretend that he can set up a task force to come and whitewash what he knows he's capable to. He is not going to tell us that we will not accept. This is a fraud of monumental proportions. We are unlike other countries that have had to shut down because of debt. Ours, we do not have. And I can tell you, with all the sums we have paid, my fellow Kenyans, we do not owe any debt to anybody. We do not. In fact, if we remove that debt from our books, I can tell you, you have a reduction of taxation and you'll have money in your pockets like you've never seen before. But people are hostage to their own creations. And we must reach a stage now where we say we are going to cut off. We are not going to be anybody's slaves. And we must cut this link, and those who are perpetuating it must face justice. And those foreigners who have been part of this, who have been perpetuating this, who know what they are doing to our demise as a country, we will also follow you. We will look for you. You are criminals. You have aided criminality. In Malaysia, you were found. In Mozambique, you were found. You shall be found even in Kenya. And those who are protecting them, please. We used to have big friends. The West have been good friends of Kenya in the past. Why do you want us to be your slaves? We are just as good, if not better than you. We deserve more, and we are not going to take this nonsense anymore. So my fellow Kenyans, we start with our own. Those who are perpetuating our slavery in something called domestic debt, those culprits, those oligarchs, must be dealt with now. Tomorrow, the day after that, go take your money from those banks. Tell them they are not at liberty to continue your slavery. Tell those banks that decide they are going to put money in bonds and bills to our detriment, bonds and bills, money that does not enter the consolidated fund, money that is going to buy bullets to kill our children, that we cannot account for. We are not going to agree anymore. Stop them and tell them that you are going to go and greet them if they perpetuate this mentality. But now that they have done it and they have sunk us, take your money back. Tell them you are going to put to enterprises and banks that are not perpetuating your slavery. Let us start at home, and we shall deal with the rest one after the other. Asanteni sana, Eric.
All right. Oh, oh. My goodness. So you, Jimmy, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
So you, what have you done, or what are you doing in your position? Because I know you are capable. You have the means. What are you doing in your position to ensure that
Yes.
justice on this economic fraud is given to Kenyans? Because Kenyans right now are unable to put money in their pockets. It
That's
is
correct.
bad.
That's correct, Amerix. And I can tell you, they will not be able to. As long as we have this monster, they will not. So the first thing is that we must get rid of these people from power. Anybody that has aided and abated this must get out of power. We must have a fresh broom. They must be removed from power because they will never accept to cut off this chain. They were part of creating it. So we must get power. That is number one. And this revolution, I want to congratulate this revolution. This is the only way. I want to congratulate those who are doing it. I want to say categorically here, I condole with the soldiers, the fallen soldiers of this revolution. And you shall one day receive commendations from a government that understands that you are heroes of this republic. We must cut off this chain, and it comes by cutting off these people in power. They must exit power. That is number one. In our own way, we have educated people. There are people who are taking up cases in courts abroad, because there's no point of trying to do it here. We have seen our courts do amazing things that you wonder what law they follow. There are people who are taking up cases in Paris and in London, right, for various aspects of this debt. Human rights lawyers who are doing so out of their own volition pro bono. But this is not about one or two issues, items. It is not about others saving us. It is not about just Jimmy Wanjigi. It is about us collectively saying it is to our demise to continue this. It must be all of us saying we are not going to agree. We are not going to agree that our children were born to be slaves and their children to be even worse slaves than they were. We must say no, and we must collectively come together and agree that that can only come with a dynamic shift that we are seeing today. This is a moment that is earth-shaking for this republic. We use it and do it properly. We will never be chained. We will see greatness in this nation, and you see us stretch this wave beyond the borders of this land. And you shall see somebody called the Great Kenyan that will be more dominant than you're seeing those Western nations. But we must get rid of this chain. This is our chain. No matter what you do, no matter where you go, no matter which way you move, if you do not remove this chain, we are done. There's no other solution. You can talk about all other things you want to talk, but I can tell you, if you do not remove this chain, we are moving nowhere. And anybody telling you they can perform will not perform if they're not talking about removing this chain. All the rest is balderdash, it is lies. You have to remove this chain. And we do not own it. We do not have it. It is actually illegal. So we are educating, Amerix. We are educating. We've taken 2 years. We spent money doing this forensic audit. We are educating. We are talking. We keep speaking. When I first started speaking, I remember people saying, but who understands all these figures, all these terminologies? Kenyans are not about the economy. They want to hear us. I said, one day, Kenya will be about issue orientation. Issues are going to drive their politics, not tribalism. Issues, their lives, their collective lives as a great Kenyans is going to drive them. So I will keep educating. I will keep informing. And you can write me off all you want, but I'll keep speaking. One day, somebody will hear because this pain will not stop. It can only grow. I've given you the figures this financial year, the next financial year, the year after that, and increases even more thereafter. This pain will continue because there's also something else it has set in. There are two twin evils just to digress a bit in economics. It's called recession and inflation. So at the beginning of the year, everybody was complaining about the high cost of living. Things are very expensive. Then William Ruto says now prices are down. It is so simple in economic terms. When you have inflation, you just tap liquidity. You trap the market, you remove money from the market. So you raise interest rates. Your banks are told to bring in more money to central bank. So you remove liquidity. But when you remove liquidity, now everybody says they have no money in their pocket. Things are very bad. Goods are there, they're still high, they have no money in their pocket because you create recession. And you fast-paced recession. Recession was always there. In other words, the growth of a nation. You stop it, you stunt it, you start going down. And the only way to solve that problem when you have those two twin devils is to reduce taxation. So you give leeway. This government cannot reduce taxation because 80% of it is going towards an item called debt. And William Ruto is so afraid of debt default because it is even more painful. He's so afraid. He's so afraid of even calling it odious and cutting it off because that means an investigation and he doesn't want to be found and they all don't want to be found. They are so afraid of all the options. So I can tell you, even if today you gave him peace to form his government or a new government or people want to join, I can assure you, you'll be back on the streets. This pain won't stop. They have no solution for your lives. They are wasting your time. In fact, I don't even know why he's still in office. The man should just stand up and say, Mimi nimeshindwa, asanteni sana. Let us call a general election. Other people can do this. They have great ideas than I do to solve this problem, or maybe more guts. This has happened to other people in the world. You get to a stage where you cannot solve the problems. I remember in England the other day, in the UK, you had a prime minister, you had 3 prime ministers in 1 year because they could not solve this problem that had been created out of the liquidity out of COVID in the UK. They literally printed money and they could solve it. Now here you have a situation where, if we are to be honest, and Ruto is to be honest with himself, he cannot solve this problem. No matter what he talks, he cannot solve it because he's too tied in it. Don't waste Kenya's time. There are always other people who can do this. Get out of the way. Exit honorably. Usher us through another general election where now Kenyans are listening to the issue. They're not being cheated by marupurupu and goodies to be given. There's no goodies here. We have a problem to solve because if we solve this problem, our greatness begins. And I say our greatness because it was just interrupted. We were on our way to our greatness, it was interrupted. Our greatness begins. Allow those that the people feel can solve their problem to sit there. You don't have to hang in there. There's nowhere where it says you must have a contract of 5 years.
Hang in there, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
I see my co-host Nyakundi is there. And there is a lady. Yes, go on. We still hear you.
Can I speak now?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to be very quick. Now, just to tell you why I was saying people like William Ruto cannot solve this problem, I want to express the illegality that has done over the last 1 year in his first budget. The development budget in the appropriations bill said that they are going to borrow foreign and external loans of 313 billion shillings. 313 billion shillings. Those are the only loans that have been approved on the budget of Kenya. And those have gone to development as per our laws. They are even listed what they are going for. In the last 1 year, that ended June 30th, his first budget, he ended up borrowing 1.
We can hear you. Go on.
And I repeat, they are in a conspiracy of a Ponzi scheme. And I again repeat, KCB, Co Bank, and Equity Bank. who are not involved in this malfeasance, and there are many others, get into those banks and deposit. These banks are part of our slavery and they must be cut off, completely cut off. And I want to say, in addition to this, that the only dialogue we should be talking about with William Samoei Ruto is a dialogue at the ballot box, no other. That is where we want to dialogue. And let me end with a famous quote I saw yesterday on James Smart's Twitter handle. And it was from a famous president from Burkina Faso called Thomas Sankara. He said, if we don't pay the debt, the lenders will not die. But if we pay it, we will die. That is the situation in Kenya. If we continue paying this, we will die. We must stop our death.
So
Asante sana.
before you go, Jimmy, now can you give us practical steps? Just tell us these are the practical steps that we need to embrace in order to avoid paying this odious debt. This is what we need to do. This is the next step. This is what we should do. This is what the citizen can do. And this is how we will stop the payment of this odious debt that we are not supposed to pay.
The only way, and I repeat, the only way, is to remove this regime from power. And any person who has been part of this malfeasance, especially over the last 12 or so years, must be removed from any decision-making position. That is the only way. The kind of money we are talking about is so humongous, so humongous. You are not going to sort it. And I appreciate the legal aspect that you can go to court, you can do this. I'm telling you, you're talking about phenomenal amounts of money. 50, 60 billion dollars that have been looted from us. And I'm telling you, they will buy nearly every institution. You must remove this regime from power. It must get out. It must have a conversation with us at the ballot box before 2027. It is the only way we are going to be able to do this. This is the only single way we are going to stop these bullets that are coming and killing our children. It must end. Our death must end. And it can only end with the perpetrators behind bars and them out of power.